Hey art nerds, are y'all ready for a little possible art supply redemption? Today we're taking a look at Miya's travel watercolor palette. How does it stack up as a travel palette? How does it stack up as a student grade watercolor palette? Those of you who have watched most, because I'm still working on it, of the student grade Showdown might remember that a year ago I reviewed Miya's larger diamond palette. And while initially in the unboxing swatch I liked it, I was very disappointed when we got to the field test. In fact, very frustrated. So frustrated, in fact, that it led to me introducing a whole new test in my reviews, and it led to me talking about comparable watercolors. So you can thank Miya for the hour-plus long watercolor reviews now, because they burned me, and now we all must suffer. But today, I'm curious to see, because a lot of my friends like this palette. I've heard some very good things about this palette, so I'm curious to see if this one performs better than their diamond palette. So let's unbox and swatch the Miya / Himi travel watercolor palette together. Hey there guys, I have had this sitting around for over a year and I am really excited to finally get around to unboxing and swatching the Miya travel palette as part of my student grade showdown for you guys today. Art nerds know and remember that once upon a time I reviewed the Miya solid watercolor palette. This one you guys see here. And I did not like it. It was very disappointing. And that disappointment came through in the field test, which is the worst time to figure out that you don't like an art supply. However, one good thing came out of it. I started doing the wet into wet test because, thank you, Miya, because of this palette. However, I have heard good things about this palette. So maybe Miya will see a little bit of art supply redemption. Maybe I'll like it better. Who knows? But I am going in with an open mind and an open heart. And hopefully this review will go better than this review went. So I believe I purchased this from Amazon. I'll get back to you guys with what it costs now. Obviously, inflation has changed the prices of everything. So what I paid for this a year and some change ago is not what it costs today, probably. This is produced by Miya, the same people who make the jelly gouache that everybody loves, and it is a travel watercolor palette. So inside is a case, it looks like maybe some paper, our palette, a water brush, and these are the colors inside. And it's labeled as Himi watercolor paint set, T, hobby, painter, and students, and it is new. And this is a nice enough packaging that I could call it almost gift packaging. You could wrap this up or stick it in a bag and be good to go. Now, just carefully open the shrink wrap using an X-Acto blade. And then try to pry this up. Aha, there we go. Okay. And I thought, actually, I'm the fool because I thought this and this were screened on the body of the watercolor palette. Oh, hi guys. I thought this was screened on and it's not. So inside our packaging, we have our watercolor case. It's fairly sturdy and compact. It seems to have a small attachment strap at the top. We also have a water brush, and then that's it. That's all she wrote. That is all that's inside. Inside the packaging it's flocked, so I don't like that texture, but some people might. And we can set this aside and actually take a look at what is inside the palette today. Inside our travel container, we have our little metal palette, and this is, in my opinion, a very unusual palette. We'll talk about that more in a second. We also have a small envelope with a little bit of watercolor paper in it. That is actually really cute. We'll explore that in a moment as well. The water brush was not in there, and I also don't think it'll fit in there. Let me try real quick because I have to know. No, it will not. So that's kind of a bummer. And I assume, because as you guys see, this has a flat bottom, you could use this to store your water. This is, it feels metal, but it's plastic. It's chrome plastic. And then these friction fit. So it's probably not waterproof. And then there's like, I really thought there was going to be more of a little strap. And it is so weird that it is so chromatic and you guys can see me. But that is basically what we got going on. What about our little watercolor palette? This little thing is actually kind of weird to me because, as you guys will see in a moment, it's actually like a plastic and metal sandwich. So we have our metal mixing surface up here, our plastic pans, and then we have a metal mixing surface down here, which makes for kind of an interesting solution to a palette. Probably takes up a little bit less space, probably makes it a little bit thinner. So that's kind of interesting. This is a fairly small palette, only 18 colors. So I'm gonna try to get it on this smaller Blick Studio Cotton Rag Cold Press watercolor block today. We'll see how that goes. So we're going to be looking for several things and doing several tests today. In our initial swatches, we're going to be looking at opacity, we're going to be looking at granulation, we're going to be looking at how well the watercolors activate and how much they pollute and muddy the water. We are also going to be looking at liftability once the watercolors have dried. We're also going to be doing some color mixing, both optical and atomic, to see how well these colors work as watercolors. And then finally, thanks to the other diamond panned Miya set, we're going to be doing a wet into wet test where I apply a bunch of water to the paper, we dabble some colors in, and we just see what happens. And often the wet into wet test can be the most revealing. I am also going to compare this palette against several other comparable student grade palettes that I have reviewed for you guys. So if you're comparison shopping, if you're looking for the best palette for you, stay tuned because we're going to be doing a lot of comparisons and talking a lot about how this stacks up against other travel sets and against other student grade watercolor palettes. But before we dive into that, I want to thank my sponsors, my comic 7-Inch Kara, which I'd love to tell you guys about here. 7-Inch Kara is a charming tale of friendship and adventure. Entirely in watercolor, we join tiny Lilliputian Kara as she discovers a huge family secret and discovers the world outside her dollhouse. Volume 1 and Volume 2 are both available in print, or you can read it at 7inchkara.com. As well as my patrons on Patreon. Their support makes reviews like this possible because not only do I use the funds from my Patreon to buy the products that I review here on the channel, but I also use it to purchase the consumables we go through when we're doing these reviews. So if you like what I do and you'd like early access to reviews like this one, you can join me at patreon.com/natosoup. And if you haven't had a chance to check out my art and my other work, I hope you guys will check me out on these social media sites here. Let's dive into things and start with our swatches. To test out opacity, I am going to use a Copic marker to apply some black lines, and that'll give us a good idea of how opaque some of these colors are. So I'm using a ruler to make sure that we get nice straight lines on our Blick Studio cotton rag paper, and then I allowed it to dry for a little while. I filled the included water cup with water so that I can test it out. So, given my experience with Miya, I am not going to pre-activate these watercolors. However, as I was swatching this, I found that these do actually need pre-activation and they're really stiff. And they did loosen up a lot with pre-activation, maybe too much. It's really hard to find the sweet spot with these. I don't really like the provided water cup. It feels unstable, but then I guess you're not forced to use it as a water cup. It could also be a brush holder. There's some small issues like weird activation, but these are actually kind of promising so far. But so was the Miya Diamond palette, so obviously further testing is needed. While most of the colors seem to be pretty finely milled, maybe even dye-based, there are a couple colors, blue, sepia, and black, that granulate quite a bit. This could be the natural pigment or the binder or the extender. It's hard to tell at this stage. None of the colors, including the white, have much opacity to them. While swatching, I show you guys the rinse cup so that you guys can see how quickly these pollute the water. And I have to say, they pollute the water pretty quickly. You're going to need to change your rinse water out frequently if you're going to use it. For the lift test, I'm using a stiffer synthetic brush, applying some water, scrubbing gently, and lifting it up with a paper towel. And I want to see varying degrees of liftability because different pigments are going to have different properties. So I found that these paints have varying degrees of lifting and staining, but there is an obvious median ground that most of these hit. They're all somewhat staining on the paper. This could just be that these are finely milled watercolors. That's something that I've noticed with a lot of the Japanese, more finely ground colors. So far, these are fairly promising. We're seeing differing degrees of granulation. We're seeing basically no opacity, which is not the best thing because you do want to see some opacity with certain colors. Certain colors should be a little bit more opaque, and we're just getting kind of a uniform, including with the white, no opacity whatsoever. There's differing degrees of liftability as well. Some are more lifting, some are more staining, but as you guys can see, there's kind of a median liftability with these as well. So next we're going to move on to the color mixing test, and I actually have plenty of room to do just that. So I'm going to take advantage of the space that I have and do my color mixing test over here on the right side of the paper. I'm going to adjust our view though so that we can actually use and talk about the mixing surfaces provided with this palette. For color mixing, we're going to start by applying the first layer of our grid for optical blending. And I found that the colors were pretty easy to select given this is a smaller 18 color palette. It was pretty easy for me to find my primaries that I want to use for color mixing. Unfortunately, I lost some of the footage for the atomic mixing, so mixing colors is easy and fairly straightforward. While wet, mixes appear very vibrant but dull a bit as they dry. This is pretty normal with student grade watercolors, but when combined with a cellulose paper, the effect is going to be very pronounced. There isn't a lot of mixing surface with this palette, but there was enough for what I needed and probably enough for a travel set. You may wish to bring an additional palette with you. So after my first layer of glazes dried, we're going to go over them again and do some optical mixing. The colors do seem to glaze, although there are some harsh edges on some of the colors, like the yellows in particular, which make me kind of hesitant about these watercolors. So these colors seem somewhat mixable. Some of them don't really want to stay mixed, and they also seem pretty glazable, but it's time to really put these to the test with the wet into wet test. So this is the area that their predecessors, the Diamond Miya, would have failed. So I'm going to grab another block of cotton rag watercolor paper. We are going to saturate this paper with water and then saturate it with color and just see what the paints tell us. So next is the wet into wet test. I'm going to apply a layer of clean water to the whole cotton rag block, and then we're just going to start glazing in some colors. So wet into wet, these behave better than I expected. The colors actually moved and intermixed and granulated, which they did not do when I field tested the original Miya palette. So I don't know if this is a different formulation or maybe I'm handling it differently, but I was able to achieve better wet into wet effects this time than the last time. Unfortunately, as you guys will be able to see here, the colors do dry a lot lighter than they originally go down. In the wet and wet test, these actually perform better than I expected, especially compared to my experience with the other Miya palette. Part of me is tempted to pull that palette out and test that again, but I know what that field test showed me, so I don't know if I need to revisit that. This is what's really more interesting to me. Now we do have a little bit of haloing. It could be from the granulation, it could be the binder, it could be the extender, but we also have some good mixing, some good wet into wet mixing. So maybe this palette is formulated a little bit differently. Maybe because they're not offering as many colors, they could do it a little bit better. I really don't know until I do the field test, but it's performing better than I expected, and I would definitely be interested in giving a field test a shot. So before we talk about comparable watercolor palettes that you guys might be also interested in checking out, especially if you're looking to save some money and get the best deal possible, the best quality possible. We're not talking false economy here. We're talking true economy where you actually like what you're getting. I want to go ahead and test out their water brush. So I filled it and I rinsed the sizing out. I'm also going to test out these. So tiny. They're very cute. I don't know. It says 300 on here. I'm assuming it's 300 GSM or about 140 pound. That's also what it feels like. It doesn't necessarily feel like a cotton rag paper to me, but this will be a good opportunity for us to kind of play around with it a little bit. Now, I am not really a big fan of water brushes. Some people can make really beautiful art with water brushes, but as you guys can see from the dripping I'm already getting, I have a lot of control issues with water brushes. I also find them a little bit frustrating because you end up squeezing out all the water when you're cleaning them. Strangely, this set came with a water brush, but it didn't come with a sponge. Now, I don't really love the sponges that they include anyway, so that's not much of a loss for me, but it does mean that if you're going to be using this to do a little bit of field painting, you're going to want to bring a paper towel, maybe a terry cloth rag, or your own sponge so that you can clean your water brush as you go. And this is really similar to a Pentel Aquash water brush. I find it difficult to control. If you have grip issues, you may also find it a little bit frustrating to use. So, but I'm not a big water brush person anyway, so this isn't like a big loss. I wasn't counting on their water brush for this, and when I do the field test, I'm probably gonna just use regular watercolor brushes. That's why you guys saw me use the other kind of brush. I was using a silver black velvet watercolor brush just because that's my preference, and when I do these tests I really am trying to be as fair as I possibly can. So I generally try to work on high quality paper, and I use the same papers over and over and over again. Basically it's the Blick Studio for all of my unboxing swatches at this point. And then I try to use a watercolor brush I actually like so that I'm not judging the paint because they threw in a free, inexpensive water brush as like a pack-in. The paper is okay. I kind of like it actually. It has like a neat, assertive texture to it that takes the watercolor well and kind of forces some granulation out of it. So it's kind of fun. Don't love the water brush, but it is a fine point water brush, good for smaller details and smaller areas. So if you are a fan of water brushes, this isn't the worst one I've reviewed. All right. So I'm going to let this dry a bit and we'll see what we've got. I've already stained the water brush. To no one's surprise, those things stain quick. And I'll just dab up some of this extra water. Let's talk about comparable watercolor sets. We're mainly talking about student grade watercolors for this. We're going to start with comparable travel sets. This is not at all inclusive of what I have reviewed, but it's stuff that I think is fairly similar and honestly stuff that I also had on hand that I could readily grab. So hopefully this will be helpful for you guys in your decision making. We're going to start with the most direct comparison, the Miya Solid Watercolor set. This is a 36 color palette, and initially I was really excited about it because people seem to really like the jelly gouache for what it is, and I'd heard good things about this set, and I liked it in the initial unbox and swatch, and then in the field test it just totally disappointed me. I will include some snippets so you guys get an idea of what I'm talking about right here. If you'd like to see the full review for the Diamond palette, you can check the description below for relevant links. I was really excited about this palette, especially because some other artists here on YouTube liked it better than I ended up liking it. And this is a big one for initially. The unbox and swatch was really promising. And then when I went around to field testing it, it did not deliver nearly as well. I really liked the format. I really liked how it swatched. I liked how the colors blended out. While there were some optical brighteners added to make the colors more appealing in the pans, I didn't find that it was like an egregious amount. And for my initial swatches, everything swatched pretty par for the course, what you would expect for student grade watercolors, maybe even a little bit better. I was really excited to go ahead and field test this palette because I thought it was going to be very similar to the Mei Liang Pigments palette. Unfortunately, and this is from the field test, it does not handle nearly as well as the Mei Liang Pigment set does. You guys will see in a minute, and I will link it in the description, but it just handles really funky. So this is still on a cotton rag paper. I had a lot of problems with color diffusion. I had problems with the colors reactivating. I had problems with the colors layering. It really didn't handle the way I expected them to handle. So initially I thought the paints in this palette might be different. They definitely seem drier, but after activating them and they kind of melted down, they do look fairly similar to the watercolors in this set. I was so disappointed with the field test in this set. I'm kind of on the fence. So I have a request for you guys. If anyone has reviewed both of these sets or knows if this set is the exact same watercolors as what's in this set, let me know down in the comments. If they are different formulations, I will be happy to do a field test with this one, but I don't like failing, especially on purpose, the way this one went. So if it's just the same thing in a different packaging, I'm not going to bother field testing it. But if you know, let me know. And I'll also do some digging around and see if I can find that out. But it seemed so promising. It was so early on in the student grade showdown. And I had just come off of a win with the Mei Liang Pigments palette. And it just... See, they even swatch really pretty. They just don't handle well. So this is the closest comparison because it's the same company, but foolish me, I'm kind of hoping that this set might have a slightly different formulation. Now in my mind, this is technically a travel palette since the container it comes in is reusable. You can use this as a water cup, and we did that today. And this also has a little carry strap that you could attach to like a backpack or something. So I'm going to consider this a travel set. So I've pulled out some comparable travel sets here. We have the Amy Tangerine Brave and Bold set, which utilizes superior watercolors. Oh, doesn't want to come out. This set always gets stuck. And I don't know why. Okay, we'll move on then, and I'll fiddle with that later. We have the Royal Langnickel set, and this is also a superior watercolor palette. It's just in a different form factor with a different white label branding on it. We have the superior, you guys noticing a trend here with me? The superior travel cup. And what makes this one interesting to me is you fill it with your own paints. But what I love is it comes, well, there's a lot that I really like about this little palette, but it comes with a collapsible water basin. It has a brush holder as well as notches at the top to hold your brush. And then inside there's a silicone gasket. And you have a small mixing surface. So even though it doesn't come with the paints, you can fill it with the paints of your choice. And all in all, this is a good little compact travel set. Maybe not for plein air because it's a little bit, with the water pot, it's a little bit chunky. But if you're going to visit someone or if you're traveling and you can set up and paint somewhere, this could be a really good option for you. We also have the Winsor & Newton, which might be Phoenix watercolor palette. And the paints inside are okay. But what makes this kind of comparable is it has a small water pot, very small compared to the Miya. Also has a small water container so you can bring water with you. It has a small synthetic watercolor brush rather than coming with a water brush, and I like that. It was a little something different, a little something retro. It comes with a natural sea sponge to wash your brush out or do lifting techniques. It comes with your watercolors, and they're slotted in kind of a unique cartridge system where we lift up the middle row and it basically frees the other ones. And then we have not as much mixing space as the Miya, but we do have a fair amount of mixing space for this one. Also comes with a thumb ring, although I wouldn't trust this thumb ring because it does have a tendency to come loose. So I think this is a really nifty little travel palette. All right, so I've got the Amy Tangerine palette free. It's kind of similar to the Winsor & Newton one, but it's like a poorly done, in my opinion, version of it. So this utilizes superior watercolors, and you can recognize that from their little cartridge system. But we talked about how these compare and did head-to-head swatches in the Unbox and Swatch review for this. So I'm pretty certain that these are superiors. It also comes with a water bottle that holds your water, a fold-out mixing surface. Do not know what this is really for. I think it's supposed to be for a brush, but it's kind of big for that, and this is pretty flimsy. It comes with a water brush. It comes with a sponge that you can scrub your watercolors out onto. It comes with a pigment-based fine liner and a golf pencil. And then these two little cups here, which ostensibly are to hold your brushes, but they're not really big enough to do that. So I don't really know what they're for. But while I don't love the layout of this set nearly as much as I like the layout for this, I actually think this one might be a little bit more of what we're thinking of when we're thinking of a travel watercolor set than the Miya set here. And then finally, it's not really student grade, it's Paul Rubens, so it's their professional grade line, but it is kind of their travel set. we have a pocket poche, and all you really get with this cute little palette here is the watercolors themselves. You do get a mixing surface, but it basically feels like Yupo, so I would recommend using a different mixing surface. But you get, I think, 24, and they're in like little eyeshadow palette things almost. You can see the metal rims, but this is a not just beautiful in terms of like the appearance, although it doesn't close all the way, but the colors inside are beautiful, and I'm really happy with the quality of the colors inside. And honestly, it's really not an expensive little travel palette, especially compared to some of the other ones we're taking a look at today. So in terms of travel palettes, I kind of feel like let me get them all in the shot. I kind of feel like the Miya palette is just kind of lost in the crowd. And of course, I'm also going to include a little segment of the Superior Watercolor Watch. It's still one of my favorite unusual travel watercolor solutions. You guys have to see it if you haven't seen it. It's a lot of fun. Jerry sells basically that rebranded. Jane Davenport sells basically that rebranded. So if you don't want to get it on AliExpress, there are some places where you can get it where you'll pay a little bit more for it. So let me tell y'all about the watercolor watch here. This is from the original Superior Watercolor Watch Unbox and Swatch. This was just really neat and fun. It was such an unusual product at the time. There's a lot of companies that have white labeled this product since, so it's not as uncommon, but at the time it just really hit this sweet spot because it is an entire watercolor set minus the brush that is basically watch size. It even came in this really nice presentation box with these refill chiclets, so you can kind of customize the palette inside your watercolor watch. Something else that I really liked about it is that the way the chiclets are designed, they are removable. You can put them anywhere in the palette that you would like them to go, and not all Superior watercolor products behave this way. It's also just a fun gimmick. It's super tiny. There's a little scrubber brush sponge in there and a teeny tiny little palette. And if you don't do plein air sketching because you just don't want to carry a bunch of stuff with you, this little watch could be a really good solution for that. And I just had a lot of fun not only reviewing it, but also taking it out into the field and field testing it. I took it out to Cheekwood, which is a botanical garden in Nashville. So you guys can see it here. I brought pretty minimal stuff and I wore the watch the whole time. The only problem was really it got kind of sweaty as I was wearing it out in the sun, but it's very compact, and since it's on your wrist, it's actually pretty stable. So here is the finished piece that I created while I was out at Cheekwood. So basically, compared to what's available and how many unique, unusual, not always usable options we have for travel watercolors, the Miya just is kind of It kind of doesn't really stand out. It doesn't really serve a unique purpose, and it's not really offering better quality or more or anything unusual other than the fact that the palette itself folds back on itself like this, which is kind of interesting, but it doesn't even secure shut. So if you don't want to bring like all the extra packet, and literally this just exists to be a travel water cup because the water brush doesn't even fit in this. So there's a lot of packaging going on with this kit that compared to, like, look, it's the same size about, it's a little bit thinner, but it's basically the same footprint as the Winsor & Newton one. Just this, if we're talking about these two cups together, it's pretty big, it's pretty substantial. So as a travel watercolor kit, it doesn't really have a place for me. So what about as a student grade palette, just in and of itself, ignoring the travel aspects of it? So I pulled three that I think are worth talking about. I have reviewed so many in this student grade showdown. I don't feel like pulling all of them out. So we narrowed it down to three. We have the Superior folding fan palette. Of the Superior watercolors, this is probably one of my favorite iterations. It reminds me of a Gansai style palette. It does take up more room, so I wouldn't call this necessarily a good... It is a travel palette, but it's got some like severe limitations that make doing plein air a challenge. But if you live in a dorm room, or if you're visiting a new city, or you're visiting family, it's that kind of travel. And it does have a ring on the back, but as you guys can see, it can't really support itself. Something else I like about this set though is that these little chiclets are removable, so you can actually reorder these paints like you would a normal palette, which is unusual for these kind of like chiclet style Superior watercolor palettes. I also just like the color range, and when I did the field test for this one, I did it after I did the other Miya field test where I was so annoyed and disheartened by it and just kind of like, ugh. And then I really, really liked how these handled in a field test scenario. So I fell in love. And I think these are probably a better option in terms of student grade than the Miya, especially if these are the same paints. I also have, as anyone who watches frequently knows, or has been keeping up with the student grade showdown knows, gotta talk about the Mailiang Pretty Excellent Parrot watercolors. These are another set of student grades that I just can't get enough of. I recommend them all the time. They show up as my comp in a lot of these. They're very inexpensive. The footprint of this, it is bigger than this, that's to be sure. Even a little bit bigger than this, to be honest, but it's a 36 half pan. They're really a little bit smaller than half pan sets. They do come in this cheap plastic liner, so I will say the body of this is nicer. This is reminding me of these tiger watercolors that a friend sent me years ago from their country's version of Dollar Tree. So kind of similar in that regard. But I think these perform a lot better. And when I was doing the field test for these, I kind of forgot I was doing a field test, much like with the Superior ones here. And I just enjoyed painting. So these have become like my gold standard, as dirty and gnarly as they look right now. These have become my gold standard for student grade watercolors because they handle really well. They are inexpensive. No, they're not professional grade, but they're good and you can do a lot with them while you're learning how to watercolor and while you're deciding if watercolor is right for you. And that's what I think student grade should bring to the table. And then finally, we have the full-size Phoenix watercolors. I haven't done the field test for this yet. That is coming. Just keep an eye out for that. This is the company that Cotman might be white labeling their products from. So if you like painting with Cotman watercolors, just go ahead and get them from Phoenix. They're going to be a little bit cheaper. But I don't like them as much as I like the Mailiang. And Mailiang is made by Paul Rubens. It's their student grade line. They're okay. I think I probably like these a little bit better than I like these. But this is a situation where the field test is really going to help me decide where everything ranks and what I recommend the most. So of course you guys should, if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, click that bell notification, and let YouTube know that you want to know how the student grade showdown shakes out, because I still need to do a big old ranked tier list for you guys. So for me, I don't know, it just isn't necessarily super great. Isn't necessarily like ranking higher than a lot of the other watercolors that I've pulled out. It's not really the best as a travel set, and it doesn't really have legs in my opinion as it compared to other student grade watercolors. But I might totally change my tune like I did with the Superior Farben watercolors, which are really just Superior watercolors being white labeled yet again. Everybody white labels Superior. I might change my tune when I field test these. I might really like them or I might really, really hate them. So I'm not giving my final opinion until we do that field test. In general, I'd like to start showing you guys the websites for these products a bit more. So this is the Miya website, and I didn't order this palette from that website. I think I ordered it through Amazon, but you can see the palette here. You can see that it's available in pink, yellow, a minty green, and then a cool blue. And you can see some of the other watercolor products that they have available. I'm actually going to review those snail sets for you guys in the future once I have recovered from this review. But as you guys can see, in terms of watercolor, they really don't have a huge range of products. What they're really well known for, what kind of was their name to fame in the US, was their jelly gouache. And it was just, while I've heard from gouache artists that their jelly gouache is not really applicable to gouache, it's kind of its own thing, it made working with an opaque water medium very easy, very accessible. It doesn't require a lot of mixing. So while that palette does have some of its flaws, and other YouTubers have talked about it a lot more than I have, it kind of opened up the world of gouache to people who might not have ever even tried gouache. So this is their distribution map or their marketing map. It doesn't really provide any information. It's just kind of a graphic, like they don't even have a key for what their colors mean. And then here is a little background about the Himi Miya company. It is a Chinese company, and that's why most of the places we can get it are like AliExpress or now Amazon. There's increasingly more companies that are starting to do business in the US using Amazon, and that can be a good way to get a hold of art supplies you never would have tried before. So I just kind of wanted to like scroll through and show you guys sort of what the site looked like. I often will write about the different company websites and link them for you guys, but I've been called out a couple of times for something I'd read on the website and mentioned in the video, and then the website changes and people have been like, hey, it doesn't promise that after all. So I'm kind of covering my butt here and showing you guys what I'm seeing and where I'm getting my information, because sites can change from time to time, and while I am a person who makes mistakes, I do try to be as careful as possible when it comes to these art supply reviews. Sped their videos up quite a bit, 4x actually, but you guys can watch them in real time on their website. But it kind of gives you a look at how their factory is run and how they handle these things. Now, for all we know, these could be entirely CG with actors, but I did think it was kind of neat to watch how their products are being produced and what their assembly line process looks like. After checking out their website and seeing what they had to say about themselves and their products, I have to ask, does Miya see redemption? And it's really hard for me to tell right now. I thought these might be different from the Diamond palette that I reviewed last year, but I see a lot of similarities that have me concerned. So I'm gonna keep trying to dig around and see if I can find out if these are the same paints as those, or maybe there's something else. The website talks a lot about their jelly gouache and not a lot about their other products, so you could tell what they're like really passionate about and then what also just kind of they're also doing. So let me know down in the comments whether or not these are the same formulation and the same paints as the Diamond. And if you guys think it's weird that I think they might be different, keep in mind that Superior has somewhat different formulations depending on the use case of their watercolors. So I don't see any reason why Himi Miya might be different. Let's talk about the pros and cons of the Miya travel watercolor set. We're going to start with the cons. It's apparently not available on Amazon, so I actually can't give you guys a price. I would assume I paid around $24 for this, but I could be wrong. but it is shown on the Miya website. So it hasn't been discontinued to my knowledge. It's just that Amazon doesn't have it. It seems very similar to the diamond set like we were just talking about. And while that set also seemed promising, it sort of fell apart during the field test. So I'm a little leery of this. It's also kind of lean for a travel watercolor set. Like there isn't a lot going on, but it takes up a lot of space. And other sets that we literally just talked about are doing more with less space. So that's also just kind of boring and unimpressive for me. It also seems kind of large for a travel watercolor set, as we just talked about. And it's honestly just sort of meh. Himi is known for their jelly gouache, but their watercolors really aren't that innovative. And these also seem to get used up really fast. So even if they are cheaper, that's a false economy because you're going to go through those paints really quickly. So what about the pros? The colors are bright and vibrant. They do offer some granulation, which is interesting. I've reviewed so many dye-based watercolors that I'm just excited to see granulation. And I honestly think they have a good selection of colors in this 18 color set. Let's talk about the verdict. I really, really hate when my verdict is, and unfortunately, that is my verdict for today. Even if this is a different formulation, even if they handle better than the diamond palette that I reviewed, I've just seen in the past year so many more interesting and innovative watercolors that this one just has me kind of snoozing. It just seems, I mean, it comes in cute colors and that is a plus. And I did try using this as a water pot and it does work as a water pot, but it's just, I don't know, maybe I've seen too many things. Maybe I should have reviewed this sooner. I wanted to give myself some time to recover from the diamond palette, and I have some other Himi Miya watercolors, including their jelly gouache, that I want to talk about here on the channel. So I wanted to give myself some time to kind of like get past my initial bias. But I'm sorry, y'all. Like, I don't have a lot I can say about this palette other than while I have some friends who like this palette, I can't necessarily recommend it just because they're better at the same price point watercolor palettes that I think you guys should give consideration instead. I would actually recommend the Mei Liang Pigments palette or the Paul Rubens Travel Pocket palette if you're looking for a smaller size palette that you can bring with you. Those palettes are going to offer you basically what you're getting with this palette with higher quality paints that aren't going to be used up as quickly. So I wish I had like more I could say, but this one just kind of like, it's in the middle. It's just kind of for me. Oh, another unboxing swatch where I'm kind of on the fence and I'm like, oh, only a field test will actually help me determine whether or not this is a better palette or just the same thing, different day sort of palette. So it's swatched pretty well. It's an 18 color palette. I was pretty satisfied with the colors in this palette. I was satisfied with how they mixed. And when we did the wet into wet test, it delivered a lot of bright, vibrant color without a whole lot of optical brightener halos or any of that weird stuff that we've seen in like Arteza and some of the other student grade watercolors that we've reviewed in the past. So far, so good for the paints themselves. That said, the palette itself as a travel watercolor palette is just kind of lackluster. I reviewed some really interesting travel watercolor palettes during the student grade showdown, and this one just isn't stand-outy enough. It's not small enough to really be a good travel palette, and it's not fully featured enough to be a good small studio palette. So it just kind of falls into this weird nowhere zone. And this is very nitpicky, but the water brush doesn't even fit in the container itself, which makes it like, well, why did y'all include it? Why not, if you want to include a travel brush, why not include some small travel brushes. We've seen some absolutely micro travel watercolor brushes in the past, so why not do that today? But I'm on the fence. You guys are just gonna have to hit that subscribe button, click that bell notification, and stick around for the field test if you're curious if this palette is a good fit for you and today's test didn't answer that for you. If you like what I do and you want to help me continue to do it, I purchase all or 99.9% of the art supplies that I review here on the channel through the funds raised on my Patreon. You guys can join me at patreon.com/natosoup, and not only will you get early access to videos like this one, but you're also going to get backer exclusive content like extended reviews, like kind recaps, like convention reconnaissance, all kinds of stuff that I don't share to the public because I want to keep it between just me and you. So hopefully you guys will check me out over there. Even if you're just curious, if you have a Patreon account, then you can follow me for free and you'll get my weekly patron backer newsletter. I share everything that went live that week in one place. So it's very handy if you like keeping up with what I do and you're not sure yet if you want to financially support what I'm doing. If you'd like to support me in other ways, you can read my watercolor comic 7-inch Kara at 7inchkara.com, or you can order your own copies in the Nato shop at natosoup.com/shop. I've been working really hard to get the shop nice and updated with all kinds of cute goodies, including my coloring book, my paint your state kits, lots of cute vinyl stickers and prints. So if you like my art and you'd like to own a little bit of it, you can find it now in the Nato shop. So hopefully you guys will check that out. While I'm on the fence about this palette, and you know, it's promising, but I've been burnt by their other products before, I feel pretty good about it, and I look forward to doing the field test at some point in the near future. I still have some more unbox and swatches I want to do for the student grade showdown before I really start diving into those field tests. So if you enjoyed today's review, if you found it helpful, useful, and informative, make sure you leave a big old thumbs up, and hopefully I'll see you guys again really soon with another art supply review or tutorial. Bye!